The content in this video is for general educational use. It does not represent political opinions or judgments about any country, culture, or government. Information is based on publicly available sources and may be summarized or simplified. Viewers should verify details through multiple sources.
Ever wondered what a scary movie, an ancient myth, and a country's real-world problems could possibly have in common? Well, today we're diving into exactly that. We're going to see how the ghosts of Malaysian folklore are taking over global cinema, and, more importantly, how they reflect a nation's deepest fears, both the supernatural ones and the ones that are terrifyingly real.
So right now, there's this incredible new wave of horror coming out of Southeast Asia, and it's grabbing audiences everywhere on platforms like Netflix. You've got films like the Malaysian demonic horror Row that are really turning heads. And it's not just about the jump scares. They're breathing new life into a genre that, let's be honest, kind of felt like it was running out of gas. Turns out the best new nightmares come from the oldest stories.
So what's the secret sauce here? What makes these movies feel so brand new? Well, it's pretty simple. They're using monsters and settings that most of the world has never seen before, pulled straight from the region's incredibly rich and spooky folklore. Forget about your standard vampires and zombies. We're getting a whole new bestiary of terrifying creatures to keep us up at night.
And the world is absolutely eating it up. Horror fans from all over are raving about these films, not just for the unique stories, but for their raw energy and amazing practical effects. It all feels a bit like those classic horror flicks from the 70s and 80s. In a market that's so saturated, they're a total breath of fresh air, mixing unique culture with just good old-fashioned terror.
All of this on-screen creativity just begs the question, right? Where are these filmmakers getting this stuff? I mean, what ancient well are they drawing from? To really understand these new movie monsters, we have to go back to the source, to the original myths that started it all. So to really get these new films, we have to understand the old fears. For centuries, Malaysian culture has been, well, haunted by this really complex world of spirits, ghosts, and these supernatural beings called Jinn. And they're not just campfire stories. They're woven deep into the fabric of everyday life and belief.
The origin of the Jinn is just fascinating. One tradition says they were born from 3 mangrove leaves. One leaf became the green Jinn of the sky, another became the black Jinn of the forest, and the last one became the white Jinn of the sea. It's such a powerful picture of that deep, deep connection between nature and the supernatural in this folklore.
And beyond the Jinn, you've got the spirits of the dead, which are incredibly specific. Some are like ancestral protectors, tied to a single family or clan. Others are shapeshifters, taking the form of a tiger or a crocodile. You get this clear hierarchy of fear. The spirit of a dead king? Yeah, you don't want to mess with that. But the most malevolent spirits of all, they're believed to rise from the bodies of people who were murdered.
Now, to really wrap our heads around how these myths work, let's zoom in on one of the most unsettling figures in all of Malaysian urban legends, the Orang Minyak. The Orang Minyak, which literally means oily man, is just pure nightmare fuel. Just like the name says, he's this predator who's covered head to toe in black grease, which makes him almost impossible to catch. Seriously, imagine trying to grab onto something that can literally slip right through your fingers in the dead of night. And this is where the legend just blew up. Back in 1958, right as cities were growing super fast, a series of popular movies made the oily man a true symbol of urban horror, a monster born from the anxieties of a rapidly changing world. And in the folklore, his goal is terrifyingly specific, to attack young women. And here's where things get really, really unsettling. The line between myth and reality just gets completely blurred. The legend of the oily man becomes this supernatural scapegoat. Real-world criminals can actually use that fear, do horrible things, and then just blame it on a phantom. The folklore becomes a convenient mask for very human evil. Okay, so this brings us to a huge pivot point. We've seen how folklore reflects a fear of the unknown, right? But what happens when a society's biggest fears aren't supernatural at all? What happens when the monsters aren't hiding in the shadows? What if they're walking among us in broad daylight? Sometimes the new kinds of monsters show up in places like political cartoons. In this one, you see this tiny sapling, and it's labeled New Malaysia. But it's being devoured by these caterpillars, each one labeled political faction. The message couldn't be clearer. The real threat isn't some spirit from the jungle, but a very human force that's eating away at the nation's future. Yeah, we're not talking about folklore demons anymore. We're talking about the demons of governance. And these aren't just opinions. They've been systematically documented in a major report on integrity in Malaysia, which lays out a whole different set of monsters plaguing the nation.
Basically, this report, called From Roots to Fruits, says the country is facing this deep-seated crisis. It's not about ghosts, it's about a fundamental breakdown in integrity, where things like corruption and just a lazy don't-care attitude have become way too common. And that makes any real reform incredibly challenging.
And this cartoon, man, it just nails the public's perception of the problem. It shows a politician climbing the ladder of government, from transport minister all the way to prime minister, while being handed bags of money from public funds at every step. It's a really cynical but powerful look at a system that people feel is fueled by cronyism.
So the report really breaks it down, piece by piece. It talks about bureaucrats who are open to corruption, politicians who use things like racism and cronyism to stay in power, and even sabotage coming from inside government ministries that actively fight against reforms like fair and open bidding processes. It seems like every part of the system has its own demon to fight.
And we're not just talking about abstract problems. We're talking about staggering amounts of money. This number, 90 million Malaysian ringgit, which is millions and millions of dollars, is tied to a massive allegation that a major political party took a huge payment from the former ruling party. It puts a very specific and very large price tag on this whole crisis of integrity.
And these two cartoons, side by side, they just perfectly capture how frustrated people are feeling. On the left, you've got the operation to catch these big-name figures moving at a literal snail's pace. And on the right, the police are asleep on the job as the command to catch Joe Low, a famous fugitive, just trails off into snores. The message is simple. Justice feels painfully slow, if it's moving at all.
And this isn't just a political problem. The report makes it clear that this crisis of integrity, it seeps into pretty much every corner of society, showing up in different but equally damaging ways.
You see this lack of integrity taking a couple of main forms. On the one hand, you have personal hypocrisy from leaders who, as the local saying goes, cakap tak serupa bikin, which basically means they don't practice what they preach. And on the other hand, you have actual systemic sabotage, where people inside the government are actively working against any effort to make things more transparent. And at the end of the day, this is why it all matters so much to regular people. This cartoon connects the dots perfectly. You see a figure holding a bag of rashwa, or bribe money, and a gas pump. And as both of those go up, so does the sign next to them, which reads Harga Barang, the price of goods. It's a straight line from corruption to the rising cost of living. So when you step back and look at it all, whether it's a story about an oily man slipping through the shadows or a cartoon of a politician gobbling up the nation's wealth, the stories a country tells reveal what it's truly afraid of. The monsters might change their shape, evolving from supernatural ghouls into systemic demons, but they're always there, giving a face to a society's deepest anxieties.
Which leaves us with one last thing to think about. If a country's folklore and its political cartoons are really windows into its soul, what do our own stories, our movies, our memes, our headlines, what do they say about the monsters we fear today? And maybe more importantly, how are we going to face them?